there are whispers older than language itself, whispers carried through olive groves over stones engraved with symbols that once glowed under the moonlight of the desert. The Hebrews called it refuah hanefesh, the healing of the soul, and they believed that every illness, every shadow in the body, was first born in the unseen world of spirit. The remedy they guarded was not written in one line of scripture, nor hidden in temples, but in the rhythm of life itself. It was a way of aligning the flesh with the breath of creation, a union between body and divine resonance. Few remember it now, yet it waits quietly, in every drop of water, every grain of salt, every heartbeat seeking peace. They said it began in the days of the prophets, when men spoke to the wind and the earth replied. In those times, to heal was not to fight disease, but to awaken harmony. Illness was seen as the forgetting of one's divine pattern, a momentary silence between the soul and its source. The ancient Hebrews observed that when prayer and nature joined in one act, the body remembered its song. This was the essence of their remedy, the sacred merging of words, elements, and faith. Imagine a stone basin in an ancient home, filled at dawn with clear water drawn from a flowing spring. A hand hovers above it, trembling not from weakness, but reverence. A voice whispers the Shem HaMeforash, the hidden name, believed to carry the vibration of creation itself. The sound ripples through the water, unseen but alive, imprinting memory onto every molecule. The Hebrews believed that water, being the element closest to spirit, could carry divine intention. When spoken over with faith, it became medicine, not just for the flesh, but for the soul's unrest. To the modern mind, this may sound like poetry, yet beneath it lies an ancient science of vibration and intention. Long before microscopes, they observed what we now call the resonance of life. The priests of old saw that words of blessing changed the shimmer of water under morning light. They felt that emotion itself had frequency, that joy, gratitude, and love refined the structure of the world around us, while anger and fear disturbed it. And so, to heal a body, one had to first purify the field of the heart. This is why the Hebrew healers began every ritual not with herbs or oils, but with silence. Silence was the first medicine, the space where divine instruction could be heard. They would close their eyes, breathe deeply, and align their heart with Ruach Elohim, the Spirit of God that hovered over the waters of creation. In that moment, they believed, the healer became a bridge between heaven and earth. There are scrolls, faded and fragile, that speak of the Mayim Chayim, living waters. These were not ordinary waters, but streams that flowed directly from natural springs, untouched by iron or man's interference. The ancients gathered them before dawn, when the world was still pure, when the air carried the memory of stars. Into these waters they spoke blessings in the ancient tongue, words so old that even their exact meanings were half lost, yet their sound still carried power. Baruch Ata Adonai, Rofe HaCholim, blessed are you, Lord, healer of the sick. But these were not words of religion alone. They were vibrations shaping reality, guiding energy back into balance. They understood what the sages would later write, that the body is a vessel of divine light. When that light dims, sickness appears not as punishment, but as a message, a sacred signal that something in the soul has lost its alignment. The remedy, then, was not only to treat the body, but to remember the light. Water, salt, light, and prayer. These were the elements of return. In the villages of Galilee, mothers would place small bowls of salted water near their children's beds. The salt symbolized preservation, the eternal covenant of the earth, and the water, purification. They whispered blessings into it at night, believing it would absorb the child's fears, cleanse unseen energies, and restore peace to the household. In the morning, the water was poured into the earth, returning what was heavy back to the ground, and the children woke lighter, calmer, free of the nightmares that had plagued them. But there was more. A deeper layer only passed through oral tradition. It was said that salt held memory, that it could store the frequencies of spoken truth. When mixed with water, it created a bridge between physical and spiritual realms. This was not mere superstition, but a reflection of cosmic law. The body itself is made of salt and water, the same elements the ancients used to heal. To bless these elements outside oneself was to bless the elements within. Thus, the act of preparing the remedy became an act of self-restoration. Some healers spoke of the 7 breaths of purity, an ancient Hebrew breathing technique said to synchronize the heart with divine rhythm. It began before sunrise, facing east. The healer inhaled slowly through the nose, imagining the breath entering not just the lungs but the soul itself. On each exhale, a sacred word was released: Shalom, Emet, or Ahava, Ruach, Neshama, Chai. Peace, truth, light, love, spirit, soul, life. These words were more than symbols. They were vibrations aligning the inner and outer worlds. To utter them was to call the divine into the body. The ancients did not separate the physical from the spiritual. For them, healing was an act of remembrance. They saw every cell as a temple, every heartbeat as a prayer. To purify the body was to clear the altar of the soul. When one bathed in blessed water or anointed themselves with oil infused with prayer, they believed the very fabric of creation responded. The divine, they said, does not live in the sky but in the resonance between breath and belief. Archaeologists have uncovered small vessels inscribed with Hebrew letters, fragments of words that translate to life, truth, and light. These were likely used to contain oils for healing rituals. Each vessel was considered sacred, not because of the clay but because of the words carved into it. The ancients believed that words engraved in matter could awaken divine forces sleeping within it. To inscribe truth was to embed intention into the physical world. Modern science, in its quiet way, begins to echo this ancient understanding. The discovery that emotion alters biochemistry, that gratitude changes the molecular structure of the body, that water responds to sound, all these are faint reflections of truths once known to shepherds and mystics of the desert. The Hebrew healers did not have laboratories, yet they understood that faith is a form of frequency, one capable of reorganizing the chaos within. Every generation carried fragments of the remedy, a grandmother teaching her children to say a blessing before eating, a rabbi whispering ancient psalms over a sick body, a mother lighting candles and asking for light to fill the home. These were not empty rituals, but remnants of a lost science, the science of divine correspondence. Each act, each prayer, each intention was a note in the greater symphony of healing. There is a story told among the mystics of Saft, of a man who fell ill and lost all strength. Physicians gave him herbs and tonics, but his spirit withered. One evening, a traveling sage visited his home and asked only for a bowl of water, a handful of salt, and a piece of linen. He whispered over the water, eyes closed, his lips moving with words the family could not understand. Then, dipping the linen into the mixture, he placed it over the man's heart. "Do not speak," the sage said. "Only breathe." Hours passed in silence, broken only by the rhythm of breath and water dripping back into the bowl. By morning, the man rose. His body was lighter, but more than that, his eyes had changed, clear, tranquil, awake. When asked what the sage had done, he replied, "He reminded my soul to return." It is said that the sage used the remedy of return, one of the lost arts of the early Hebrew mystics. It involved invoking the hidden name of each element, calling upon the consciousness of water, salt, and breath. The remedy worked because it did not heal from outside in, but from inside out. The soul remembered its pattern and the body followed. In the Talmud there is a phrase, "Refuah kodem lamaka," the healing comes before the wound. It suggests that divine healing already exists in potential before any sickness appears. The remedy, then, is not created, it is revealed. The ancients understood this deeply. When they healed, they did not impose their will, but uncovered the wholeness that was already there. They believed every body contains its own medicine, awaiting only remembrance and alignment to awaken. And so they prayed not to be saved from illness, but to remember their original harmony. They would say, "Let the water in me recognize the water in heaven. Let the salt in me remember the sea. Let the breath in me echo the wind that carried the voice of creation." These words, spoken softly at sunrise, were not superstition. They were a covenant between matter and spirit. At the heart of this remedy was a symbol, the Hebrew letter Aleph. It represents unity, the silent breath before sound. Every healing ritual began with it. The healer would draw Aleph in the air with the right hand, inhaling deeply as if pulling invisible light through the body. This act was said to awaken the alignment between man and creation. The Aleph reminded them that all life shares one breath, one source. When that truth was felt, healing began. In the old language, heal and whole share the same root. To heal is to become whole, to remember one's place in the divine pattern. The Hebrews believed the soul is like a flame within a vessel. If the vessel is cracked by fear, pride, or despair, the light flickers. The ancient remedy was designed to seal those cracks through intention, vibration, and sacred elements, allowing the flame to burn steady again. Many of the old writings describe water not as a substance, but as a mirror. It reflects whatever is placed before it, not only physically but energetically. To gaze into it after prayer was to see not one's face, but one's state of being. If the water shimmered softly, it was said the soul was aligned. If it clouded or moved restlessly, purification was needed. The healer would then speak the tikkun, a short phrase of restoration, calling light back into the reflection. Those who practiced this art spoke of profound stillness afterward, a sense that the boundaries between body and world had dissolved. They described feeling the pulse of the earth within their veins, the hum of the stars in their breath. It was as if by harmonizing with the elements, they remembered they were never separate from creation at all. Some teachings hinted at an even deeper layer, that the remedy was not bound to water or salt alone, but to consciousness itself. When the healer's mind entered true coherence, reality rearranged around it. The sick recovered, the weary found rest, and even the atmosphere seemed to soften. They called this ruach refuah, the spirit of healing. It was said to flow wherever truth was spoken with love. And so, from generation to generation, the knowledge flickered like a hidden flame, never fully extinguished, never fully revealed. The Hebrews carried it through exile, through deserts, through silence. They knew that divine knowledge cannot be destroyed. It can only sleep, waiting for hearts pure enough to awaken it again. Perhaps that is why you are hearing these words now. For what they called the remedy of light was never meant to remain secret, only sacred. It is not a potion or a spell, but a way of remembering what you already are. A vessel of divine resonance, a living echo of the first breath that moved across the waters. And somewhere deep within your own being, that water still remembers. They say revelation does not arrive like thunder. It comes as a whisper between heartbeats, a memory rising from the depths of the soul. When one listens long enough, it speaks, and what it reveals is never truly new. It is something we once knew but forgot. The ancient Hebrews called this remembrance da'at harefuah, the knowledge of healing, a sacred thread woven through the Torah, concealed in rituals, encoded in letters that form the very architecture of creation. The more we listen, the more the veil thins, and we begin to perceive the invisible lattice that connects spirit and matter, word and form, faith and cell. This was the secret guarded by the sages, that the divine name itself was a medicine. The letters Yod, He, Vav, He, the ineffable tetragrammaton, were not simply symbols of God's identity, but frequencies, tones of creation. They believed that every living thing vibrates according to these four letters, as though the entire universe hums in divine language. When the human being falls into dissonance, through fear, anger, or forgetfulness, illness arises as a disharmony in that song. To restore health was to retune oneself to the sacred name. The priests who served in Solomon's temple were not merely attendants of ritual, they were keepers of vibration. They sang psalms not only as praise but as precision, each word a tone aligning heaven and earth. The sound of the shofar, the blowing of ram's horn, was not a call to battle, but to awakening. It was said that its vibration could shatter invisible walls within the heart, allowing light to flow where shadows once dwelled. This was the Hebrew understanding of sound as medicine, an ancient forerunner to what we now call frequency healing. Revelation deepens when one sees that nothing in creation is inert. The ancients knew that every element carries consciousness, and that to speak to these forces with reverence is to engage in dialogue with the divine. When a healer uttered the ancient blessings over water or oil, they did not merely hope for change, they invited consciousness to align. The words acted as keys, unlocking the dormant intelligence of nature. It was not superstition, it was communion. In the scrolls of the Merkava mystics, there is mention of the rivers of living fire. These were not physical rivers, but streams of divine energy flowing through all realms. The human body, they wrote, is one such river, a vessel of light clothed in clay. When the flow is blocked, illness arises. The remedy, then, is to open the channels, to let the divine current move once again. The Hebrews learned that gratitude, spoken aloud, was among the strongest keys. When they gave thanks, not only for blessings but for suffering, they witnessed a shift within, a softening, a release. Gratitude, they taught, transforms contraction into expansion. There is a story in the Midrash about a healer who lived by the Dead Sea. People traveled from far lands to seek his guidance, for he never used herbs or potions. Instead, he taught them to speak to the elements. One evening, a man came to him broken in spirit. "My body aches, my sleep is gone," he said. "I am cursed." The healer led him to the sea and told him to kneel. "The salt of this sea has witnessed creation," he said. "It remembers purity. Speak to it." The man hesitated, but the healer continued. "Confess to the water, release what you have carried." And so, with trembling voice, the man spoke of his regrets, his failures, his hidden guilt. When he finished, the healer said, "Now forgive yourself aloud." The man whispered, "I forgive myself." The healer smiled. "Then the sea will forgive you too." The next morning the man woke lighter, not cured by medicine but by mercy. This was the essence of revelation, that forgiveness itself is healing. The Hebrews understood illness as stagnation, energy trapped in the web of unspoken emotions. The act of confession, the vibration of truth leaving the body, was a spiritual exhale. In that release, the divine flow returned. Modern science may call it psychosomatic release, but the ancients saw it as sacred alchemy, the transformation of heaviness into light. The Hebrew mystics wrote of a sacred triad, Nefesh, Ruach, and Neshama, the three layers of the soul. Nefesh is the animating force, the life that courses through blood and bone. Ruach is the emotional wind, the seat of desire and feeling. Neshama is the divine spark, pure consciousness untouched by pain. When one falls ill, it is often the Ruach that is disturbed, rippling into the body. The remedy, therefore, is to bring Ruach back into harmony with Neshama. This alignment was the true healing, the return of inner equilibrium between the emotional and the eternal. They used specific tones for this purpose, notes sung on the breath of prayer. The psalms were not read but chanted, each syllable stretched to match the rhythm of the heartbeat. When a healer sang Adonai Roi Lo Exar, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want," the intention was not petition but resonance. The repetition calmed the nervous system, entrained the pulse, slowed the breath. The sound became a vessel for presence. In this stillness, the Ruach was soothed, and the body followed. Revelation often came through dreams. The prophets considered the dream state a bridge between worlds, a time when the conscious mind stepped aside so the soul could speak. Many remedies were revealed in visions, instructions whispered in the language of symbol. A healer might dream of pouring oil over a flame and interpret it as the need to balance passion with surrender. Another might see a river flowing uphill, a sign that energy within the body was moving against its natural current. In the morning, the healer would adjust the ritual accordingly. Dreams were not random. They were divine communication encoded in imagery. Among the ancient tribes, there was one practice known as the Covenant of Light. It was performed at dawn on the first day of the new moon. The healer and the one seeking restoration would stand barefoot on the earth, facing the rising sun. A bowl of pure water would be held between them. As the sun's rays touched the surface, the healer would recite words from the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, believed to contain the blueprint of creation. "Through 32 paths of wisdom," he would whisper, "the Eternal engraved his world." Then, dipping his fingers into the water, he would sprinkle it upon the one before him, saying, As light enters water, may wisdom enter you. It is said that those touched by this ritual often wept, not from pain, but from recognition. The body remembered what the mind had forgotten. They described feeling as though something ancient within them had awakened, a pulse beneath the pulse. The ritual was not about the water alone, but the consciousness infused into it, the merging of sun, earth, word, and will. The revelation deepens when one realizes that these rituals were not bound to religion. They were echoes of universal truth, the idea that the physical world responds to awareness. The Hebrew healers simply learned to listen more carefully than others. They saw divine intelligence in every atom and understood that the act of blessing was participation in creation itself. To bless water was to continue the Genesis story, to speak light into form. In Kabbalistic writings, it is said that the world is sustained by 10 emanations, the Sephirot, channels through which divine energy flows. Healing, they taught, occurs when these channels are open and balanced within a person. The heart corresponds to Tiferet, the sphere of harmony, the mind to Chokhmah, wisdom, the liver to Gevurah, strength. Each organ, each emotion, mirrors the cosmic structure. To purify the body was to realign the microcosm with the macrocosm, the small self with the divine pattern. When the priests anointed with oil, it was not merely symbolic. The oil, pressed from olives under sacred intention, was believed to hold solar energy, the condensed light of the sun. Mixed with a trace of frankincense or myrrh, it became what they called shemen hamishcha, the oil of consecration. When applied to the forehead, it was said to awaken the kita, the crown of divine connection. The scent itself was medicine, guiding breath and thought toward sanctity. Even today, scientists know that aroma alters brain chemistry. The ancients knew it altered the soul. Revelation, in its truest form, dissolves boundaries. The Hebrew sages wrote that the human being is both healer and healed, both vessel and light. They said that when one speaks blessing over another, the blessing flows first through the speaker. Thus, to heal another was also to heal oneself. This is why they approached their art with humility. Ego would block the current. Only love, they said, could carry the vibration of the name. Imagine now a small stone courtyard in Jerusalem, thousands of years ago. A sick woman lies on a mat beneath an olive tree. Around her, candles flicker, casting golden reflections on the walls. The healer sits beside her, eyes closed, breathing slowly. In his hand, a bowl of water glows with the reflection of the flames. He begins to hum, a low, steady tone vibrating from the chest. The sound is not a song, but a current. With each vibration, the air itself seems to shimmer. He dips his fingers into the water and touches them to the woman's forehead. "Shalom," he whispers. "Peace to your soul." The woman's breath deepens. Her face softens. The healer continues, whispering the sacred letters, Yod, He, Vav, He, with reverence. The sound is gentle, yet vast, like wind through a canyon. The vibration fills the space, echoing beyond hearing. In that resonance, the walls between spirit and flesh begin to thin. It is not a miracle in the sense of spectacle. It is alignment, the return of coherence. The woman begins to weep softly, not from sorrow but release. The healer smiles faintly, for he knows the remedy has begun to work. This was how revelation appeared, not as flashes of divine intervention, but as quiet harmony restored. The Hebrew word for healing, rephua, shares its root with riphe, meaning softness. To heal is to soften, to release resistance, to allow light to flow again. The body, once hardened by fear, becomes fluid, receptive. It remembers its purpose, to be a dwelling for spirit. And so the ancients understood that true medicine is not imposed, but invited. It is not found in the marketplace, but in the sanctuary of the heart. Every element, water, salt, oil, fire, air, waits only for consciousness to awaken its power. The ancient Hebrew remedy was not a secret formula, but a language, the language of resonance between the seen and unseen. When one whispers gratitude to the water, blesses the meal before eating, breathes light into their chest at dawn, they are practicing this ancient science. Every sacred act is a continuation of revelation. The remedy is alive because the divine is alive in all things. Revelation, then, is not found in ancient scrolls or forgotten temples, but in the space between breaths. It is the moment you realize that healing does not come from outside you. It returns from within you. The same light that once moved across the waters moves still, through your veins, through every heartbeat that echoes the first sound of creation. You are not separate from the remedy. You are the remedy remembering itself. There comes a moment when revelation ceases to be knowledge and becomes movement, when what was once understood begins to reshape what is. This is the passage from knowing to becoming. The ancients called it hit bone nut, the transformation that occurs through contemplation so deep that it dissolves the barrier between thought and being. It was said that when one truly perceives divine order, the body itself begins to reorganize, as though remembering the original blueprint of perfection it was born from. The transformation begins in silence, not the absence of sound, but the quiet that arises when all inner noise falls away. The Hebrew mystics taught that every soul carries a pattern of divine symmetry, but life's experiences, fear, grief, resentment, distort that geometry. The sacred remedy worked by restoring the soul's shape through harmony. They called it tikkun haguf vehanefesh, the restoration of body and soul. And the process always began with surrender. In the writings of the desert prophets, there is a passage describing a healer who would lead those seeking renewal into the wilderness. "When you have walked until you hear only wind," he would say, "then you are ready." Out there, surrounded by the vast silence of creation, the seeker was instructed to release every image they had of themselves, every title, wound, and memory, until nothing remained but awareness. In that emptiness, they encountered the divine not as concept, but as breath, moving through all things. That was the first transformation, from separation to unity. As night fell, the healer would light a single flame and set a bowl of water beside it. "Look," he would whisper, "and see what the light does upon the surface." The flame would tremble, reflected in endless ripples. "This is you," he would say, "the light of heaven trembling upon the waters of form." Then he would extinguish the candle, leaving only the memory of its glow in the water. "Now," he continued, "see how the reflection remains, even when the flame is gone. The divine spark within you does not vanish. It remains in the memory of creation itself." Those who experienced this ritual often spoke of feeling something dissolve, not as emotion, but as density lifting. They wept without reason. Their bodies tingled as if filled with current. The healer would tell them that the soul, once reminded of its light, begins to expel what does not belong. Pain, illness, bitterness, these were not enemies, but excess shadows released as the system returns to coherence. In this way, transformation was never an addition, but a shedding, a purification through remembrance. The Hebrew language, sacred in its structure, reflects this mystery. Each letter is a vessel of energy, and every word a constellation of meaning. The word ruach, spirit, also means wind, breath, and movement. To heal, therefore, one must allow movement to return to what has become stagnant. Tears, breath, sound, all are vehicles for divine flow. The ancient remedy often invoked these natural forces to awaken the body's dormant vitality. One practice, known among the mystics as the breath of Solomon, was performed facing the dawn. The healer and the seeker would stand barefoot, palms open, and breathe in rhythm with the rising sun. On the inhale, they would imagine drawing light from the horizon into the chest. On the exhale, they whispered, "Ani or," "I am light." This was not affirmation, but invocation. To speak it was to awaken the divine spark within, to invite the soul's fire to illuminate every cell. Those who practiced it regularly described sensations of warmth spreading through the body, fatigue lifting, and a calm joy settling deep in the heart. Transformation required participation, the willingness to meet the divine halfway. The healer could not impose harmony, they could only guide one toward it. This was the essence of Hebrew medicine. It was cooperative, not transactional. The healer was a mirror, a vessel through which the presence of God reminded the soul of its origin. The true power resided in the one who received, for within them lay the same spark of creation. When this truth was realized, miracles followed naturally. It was in this phase that the physical world and the metaphysical began to merge. The ancient Hebrews believed that the organs themselves were instruments of divine resonance. The heart corresponded to compassion, the liver to judgment, the lungs to discernment, and the kidneys to wisdom. When one emotion dominated, the instrument fell out of tune. To restore balance, the healer would chant the corresponding psalm, creating a vibrational field around the body. Modern science might call this entrainment. The ancients called it song of alignment. They observed that water within the body responded immediately to emotion. Joy expanded it, sorrow contracted it. When they spoke blessings over a person, they imagined every cell as a droplet, each one listening. The human being, composed mostly of water, was thus a living vessel for divine communication. Every word, every breath, was a message sent into this internal sea. To speak in love was to turn water into light. Transformation also occurred through ritual purification. One of the most powerful practices was the mikveh, the sacred immersion in living water. To the uninitiated, it was merely bathing. To the mystic, it was rebirth. Before entering the water, the individual would pause on the threshold, eyes closed, and whisper, "Hineni, here I am." It was an act of surrender to the process of renewal. As they submerged completely, the separation between self and creation dissolved. For a moment, they returned to the waters of Genesis, to the womb of divine possibility. When they emerged, they were not cleansed in the ordinary sense. They were rewritten. The vibration of the sacred water had reminded every molecule of its divine order. The transformation that followed was subtle but undeniable. Faces softened, voices grew gentle. Those who once carried bitterness found forgiveness rising unbidden. Even ailments long resistant to medicine began to ease. The ancients did not claim this as magic, but as resonance restored. They believed that when the soul vibrates in truth, the body must follow. In the teachings of the Zohar, it is said that the human heart is a lamp of God. The flame burns brighter when fed by compassion, and dimmer when smothered by fear. Transformation, then, was the act of clearing the soot, the accumulated residues of pain, doubt, and shame. One story tells of a woman who had lost her voice after years of grief. A sage instructed her to recite Psalm 51, not as prayer, but as song, each line drawn from the depths of her chest. "Create in me a pure heart," she sang through tears, "and renew a right spirit within me." Over days her voice returned, not as before, but clearer, warmer. The sage said, "Your heart remembered its flame." In this way, the Hebrew remedy was never only about the body. It was a realignment of dimensions, emotion, mind, and spirit, interwoven like threads of light. To heal the body, one must heal the story it carries. For every pain, every wound, is a narrative etched into flesh. The ancient healers guided people to rewrite those stories, not with words but with vibration. They knew that forgiveness, gratitude, and faith were not moral virtues alone. They were frequencies capable of restructuring reality. One of their most profound teachings spoke of the heart's gate. They believed that every human heart has an invisible doorway through which divine energy flows. When closed by fear or resentment, the entire being weakens. When opened through love or awe, the flow of life becomes unstoppable. To open the gate, one had to speak truth aloud. Confession, in their understanding, was not about guilt, but liberation. "A sealed heart cannot heal," they said. "Open it with the sound of your own honesty." Transformation deepens when one no longer sees themselves as broken. The healer's role was to reveal to the sick the hidden perfection beneath their suffering. "Your pain is not your enemy," they would whisper. "It is your teacher showing you where love has yet to enter." When the sufferer accepted this, the energy shifted. Illness lost its power because it had fulfilled its purpose, awakening awareness. The moment understanding dawned, the remedy completed itself. At times, transformation took visible form. A man long stooped by sorrow would suddenly stand tall. A woman racked by fever would feel coolness spread through her chest after a single word of blessing. These were not miracles to the ancients, but confirmations that divine order had been restored. They did not claim to heal, they witnessed the return of harmony. The healer was merely a midwife to the soul's rebirth. It was common during these rituals to hear soft chanting, the repetition of the divine names, Eloah, Adonai, Shaddai, Ehyeh. Each carried a different vibration, each opened a specific gate within the human spirit. The rhythm entranced both healer and healed, bringing them into shared coherence. When the chant reached a certain resonance, a profound stillness descended. In that stillness, time dissolved. Some said they could feel light moving through their veins, like gentle lightning. The air itself shimmered, heavy with presence. This was the threshold of transformation, where the finite met the infinite and recognized itself. The Hebrew mystics understood that such moments could not be forced. They arose naturally when love exceeded fear, and so the remedy always ended with gratitude, a humble acknowledgement that the healer and the healed were both instruments of something greater. The prayer that closed every session was simple, Baruch Atah, Che Ha'olamim, Blessed are you, life of the worlds. To utter it was to seal the transformation with reverence, ensuring that the restored harmony would remain. In this phase, transformation is not only individual but collective. The Hebrews believed that when one person is healed, a portion of the world is healed with them. Every restored soul strengthens the web of creation. Illness, in this view, was never a solitary burden but a call for reconnection. Thus, the remedy extended beyond the body into the very fabric of reality. To purify oneself was to purify the world. The transformation, then, is not a destination but a reawakening of participation. The realization that you are not a bystander in creation but a co-creator. Every breath, every word, every act of kindness ripples outward, shaping the unseen currents of existence. The ancient Hebrew healers knew this. That is why they lived with such gentleness, such care in their speech and intention. For to them, every moment was an opportunity to bless. And when one begins to live this way, with awareness that the divine moves through all things, the distinction between healing and living disappears. Every sunrise becomes a prayer, every meal a sacrament, every encounter a chance to reflect light. The body, once heavy, becomes luminous. The mind, once restless, becomes clear. The heart, once guarded, becomes open. This is the true transformation, not escape from the human condition, but transfiguration within it. To be flesh illuminated by spirit, to walk the earth as a vessel of the eternal. The ancient Hebrew remedy was never about avoiding suffering, but about remembering that even suffering is sacred when held in light. For when light enters the wound itself becomes the doorway through which the divine is revealed. And so, the seeker, once frail and uncertain, begins to walk differently, each step grounded yet light, each breath a quiet hymn. The world appears unchanged, yet everything glows faintly with new meaning. The trees seem to breathe, the air hums softly, and even the silence carries presence. Transformation has taken root, not as something learned, but as something remembered, for the body has recalled its holiness, and the soul its original song. At dawn, when the desert still holds the night's breath, the world seems to hover between what was and what is about to be. That is the hour of awakening, the threshold where transformation blossoms into revelation lived. The air is cool, the horizon pale gold, and everything waits for the first light. The ancient Hebrews called this moment Neshifa, the divine exhale, the breath of God returning to the world after the silence of darkness. To them, awakening was not a metaphor. It was a literal participation in the rebirth of creation, repeated every morning in the human soul. When one had undergone purification and transformation, the next step was not rest but awareness. The body, now emptied of noise, became a vessel capable of perceiving subtle truths. The ancients believed that the world constantly speaks, not in human words, but through vibration, light, and movement. Trees whisper of balance, rivers carry memory, stones hold prayers, but only a heart cleansed of dissonance can hear it. In awakening, the senses transcend survival and become instruments of communion. The Hebrews saw awakening as the union of chokmah, divine wisdom, and bina, understanding. Wisdom descends like a spark from above, Understanding rises like a flame from below. When they meet, illumination occurs. That light, they taught, is not seen with the eyes, but felt in the marrow, a serene certainty that everything is one. It is not emotion, not thought, but knowing without argument. The sages called it Da'at Elyon, higher knowledge, the state in which human consciousness merges with divine perspective. In that state, healing becomes more than restoration. It becomes revelation, the direct experience that the body, the world, and God are expressions of the same essence. Illness, once seen as fracture, is understood as shadow. Fear, once felt as separation, is seen as invitation. The awakened one no longer asks to be healed because they see that wholeness never left. Every ache, every tear, every breath is part of the divine speaking through form. This is why the Hebrews began their day with Modeh Ani, a prayer that translates not as request, but as gratitude. I thank you, living and eternal King, for returning my soul to me with compassion. It was the first acknowledgement that awakening itself is a gift, the soul choosing again to inhabit the body. In this gratitude, they oriented consciousness toward light. From that moment, every act became holy. Eating was communion, walking was prayer, silence was song. Awakening also revealed that the sacred remedy was never contained in an object, not the water, nor the salt, nor the oil, but in the consciousness that interacted with it. The elements were mirrors reflecting the state of the one who touched them. When the heart was pure, the simplest cup of water became living medicine. When the heart was heavy, even the most elaborate ritual was empty. Thus, awakening returned the healer to humility, a remembrance that the divine works not through control, but through alignment. The old mystics described the awakened soul as Ner Adonai Nishmat Adam. The lamp of God is the soul of man. The flame does not belong to the lamp, it passes through it. Likewise, divine energy flows through the human being, illuminating the world for a time before returning to the source. The lamp's purpose is not to own the light, but to reveal it. When one realizes this, pride dissolves, fear dissolves, and life itself becomes effortless participation in the eternal dance of giving and receiving. One of the lost texts of the Essene healers, said to have roots in Hebrew mysticism, speaks of the night of 7 silences. It describes a rite performed after deep transformation. The initiate would spend 7 nights in solitude, fasting from speech, listening only to the rhythms of the body and the world. On the 7th morning, they were to speak a single word, Echad, one. That was the moment of awakening, not an idea of unity, but the felt reality of it, a pulse connecting everything from the smallest grain of sand to the furthest star. Those who experienced it said afterward that they could no longer see the world as fragmented. The same energy flowed through enemy and friend, through light and shadow, through life and death. The Hebrews taught that awakening restores shlemut, completeness, not perfection without flaw, but harmony among opposites. To awaken is to cease resisting what is and to perceive divine purpose even in imperfection. The awakened healer sees God in decay as much as in bloom, in silence as much as in song. This acceptance dissolves suffering at its root, for pain loses its meaning when all is seen as expression of one infinite intelligence. In ancient sanctuaries, those who reached this state were called Rofei Or, healers of light. They no longer needed ritual tools. Their presence alone altered vibration. It was said that when they entered a space, animals grew calm, plants stood taller. Even the air seemed to shimmer with peace. They radiated coherence, the natural harmony of someone aligned with the source. To be near them was to feel remembered by creation. Awakening is contagious, though not in the way of contagion, but in the way of dawn. When light touches one horizon, it inevitably reaches another. The Hebrew mystics knew this, which is why they spoke not of preaching, but of presence. Be as the lamp, they wrote, and you will light many without knowing it. The awakened person heals the world not by effort, but by being. Their peace becomes an atmosphere, their silence a blessing, their gaze an affirmation of the sacredness in all things. One teaching from the Bahir says, when the heart is pure, even a whisper becomes thunder in heaven. The awakened understand this not as metaphor. Every thought is creative, every word formative, every emotion a seed cast into the field of reality. To live consciously is to plant only those seeds that grow love. The Hebrews believed this was humanity's true role, not dominion over the earth, but guardianship of its vibration. At this stage, the ancient remedy becomes simple beyond belief. A glass of water blessed with gratitude, a breath taken in awareness, a single word spoken in kindness. These small acts ripple outward, rebalancing unseen fields. The awakened healer no longer seeks grand solutions, for they have seen that the universe responds not to complexity, but to sincerity. Faith, they discovered, is the highest technology. As awareness expands, so too does compassion. The awakened see the pain of others not as burden, but as call. They move through the world as instruments of gentle repair, whispering silent blessings to strangers, praying for harmony in cities, touching the earth with reverence. They embody the phrase tikkun olam, the healing of the world, through presence rather than persuasion. Theirs is not the power of doing, but of being so aligned with divine will that healing happens naturally around them. In the Hebrew worldview, awakening also meant remembering the eternal nature of the soul. The body might fade, but consciousness continues, flowing back into the ocean from which it came. Thus death was not feared, but revered as the great return. Those who had awakened met it with serenity, seeing it not as end, but transformation of form, the completion of a sacred cycle. Nothing truly dies, they would say. It only changes garments. To live with that awareness was to live without fear, and without fear, the heart becomes an open gate for grace. Many of the ancient healers described moments when the boundary between themselves and the divine vanished completely. During prayer or blessing, they felt a vast presence flowing through their hands, their voices, their eyes. It was not possession but partnership. I do nothing. One text records a healer saying, I become the space where the eternal moves. This was the highest expression of the Hebrew remedy, not an act of will but of surrender so complete that God could work without obstruction. In awakening, miracles cease to be exceptions. They become the natural language of a universe finally recognized as living consciousness. Rain falls in answer to prayer, not because the sky is commanded, but because human intention and divine order are one movement. Wounds close not through defiance of nature, but through the remembrance that nature itself is sacred intelligence. The awakened understand that everything responds to awareness, and that awareness is the essence of life. To awaken is also to see the hidden threads of divine timing. The ancient texts speak of Hashgacha Pratit, the intimate providence guiding all events. What once seemed coincidence is now perceived as choreography, the delay that caused frustration, the illness that forced rest, the meeting that altered destiny. All are seen as steps in a design of mercy. In this vision, nothing is wasted. Even pain becomes a form of grace, teaching what comfort never could. The awakened live in gratitude, not because everything is easy, but because everything is meaningful. Their prayer is constant not through repetition, but through perception. Every breath, every sensation, every glance becomes an interaction with the divine. They no longer seek heaven as destination. They see it unfolding through every act of awareness. It is said that when Moses descended from Sinai, his face shone with light so bright that others could not look upon it. That light, the mystics explained, was not bestowed upon him. It was revealed through him. In communion with the eternal, his body had become transparent to the divine radiance always present within. This story, the sages said, is not history but prophecy. Every human being carries the same potential. When the veil of fear lifts, the light emerges. That is awakening, the rediscovery of the radiance hidden in ordinary life. And so in the quiet hours before sunrise, the awakened ones rise from sleep, not as dreamers returning to world, but as souls remembering eternity. They wash their hands with water, not merely to cleanse, but to honor the life flowing through them. They bless the day, not for what it will give, but for the chance to give themselves anew. They walk softly, speak gently, listen deeply, aware that every moment is a sacred conversation between creation and creator, Awakening is not an end, but a beginning, the flowering of divine awareness through human form. The remedy of the Hebrews was never meant to be kept in temples or texts. It was meant to live in hearts. When remembered, it transforms every life into a sanctuary. The body becomes an altar, the breath a prayer, and the soul a flame reflecting the light of the infinite. And as the first rays of sunlight spill over the hills, the awakened one smiles, not because all questions are answered, but because they no longer need to be. The mystery is no longer something to solve, but something to live. The desert wind moves softly through the olive trees. The water in the basin shimmers as if stirred by invisible hands. Somewhere a bird begins to sing, not to announce but to participate. The healer closes their eyes, breathes, and whispers the ancient words once more. Let the water remember. Let the light remain. Let the soul awaken. The sound fades into silence, and yet it lingers, alive in the air. A resonance that does not end, only continues. For awakening is not the conclusion of the journey. It is the moment you realize the journey itself was holy all along. Night returns gently to the desert. The stars bloom one by one across the endless sky, and the same silence that began the journey descends again. But now it feels different. Not empty, not uncertain. It feels alive, as though the whole universe breathes with you. This is the final phase, the quiet after revelation, the stillness that follows awakening. It is not an ending, but a return to simplicity, to gratitude, to the recognition that all sacred journeys lead us back to where we began, yet we see it now with new eyes. The Hebrew mystics called this phase Menuchat HaNefesh, the rest of the soul. It is not sleep, but serenity. The deep peace that comes when striving ceases, when the heart no longer demands proof and faith no longer requires effort. In this peace, the body softens into its natural rhythm, the mind becomes transparent, and the soul shines unobstructed. The ancient remedy completes itself here not through action, but through acceptance. The circle closes. Those who had walked the long path of healing, through curiosity, revelation, transformation, and awakening, would often end their journey by sitting beneath the open sky. They would face the wind and let it touch their skin, breathing as though inhaling eternity. The same words were always whispered at the end, Shuv el Haor, return to the light. It was a prayer, a surrender, a reminder that nothing once illuminated can ever be lost to darkness again. In reflection, one sees that the remedy was never external. The herbs, the prayers, the salt, the water, they were bridges, sacred metaphors for what was happening within. The real medicine was remembrance, to remember that one is not separate, not forgotten, not unworthy of wholeness. The divine never withholds itself. It simply waits for recognition. When the eyes of the soul open, the world itself becomes the healer. And so the sages taught, the greatest healing is gratitude. Gratitude not for what has been fixed, but for what has been revealed. The healed person does not say, I am cured. They say, I am home. Home in the body, home in the moment, home in the vastness of creation. This is shalom, not merely peace as the absence of conflict, but peace as the fullness of being. The Hebrews understood that reflection is the most sacred part of the process because it transforms knowledge into wisdom. Knowledge can be taught, wisdom must be lived. In reflection, the journey becomes a rhythm rather than a story. It repeats through every breath. Inhale, creation. Exhale, return. To live in awareness of that rhythm is to live in alignment with the divine pulse. It is said that after Moses saw the burning bush, he never looked at the world the same way again. For what had burned without being consumed was not a miracle to be admired, but a truth to be remembered. That divine fire lives within all things, awaiting recognition. Reflection is that seeing, the moment you realize that every flame, every drop of water, every heartbeat is a continuation of that same miracle. The healers who lived by this wisdom did not speak often. They became men and women of few words, their silence saying more than any teaching. When they did speak, their voices carried the softness of certainty. They would tell their students, do not seek light elsewhere. Polish the mirror within and the light will appear. That was the entire essence of their remedy, the polishing of perception until the divine was visible in all directions. In this phase, prayer changes shape. It is no longer asking nor even praising. It becomes listening. Each sound, each sensation, each breath becomes a line in the ongoing scripture of creation. The awakened person learns to read that scripture, to see divine intelligence in the movement of leaves, in the laughter of a child, in the rhythm of their own pulse. The separation between sacred and mundane dissolves entirely. Washing one's hands becomes an act of consecration. Walking across the earth becomes pilgrimage. Reflection also reveals the quiet humility of the elements. Water never boasts of its purity, yet it cleanses everything. Light never demands worship, yet it awakens all life. Salt never asks to be noticed, yet it preserves what is good. The ancients saw in these elements the perfect example of divine service, the power that does not proclaim itself. They taught that true holiness behaves the same way, invisible, constant, and kind. In the final stage of the remedy, the healer would instruct the one who had been restored to perform an act of service. It could be small, giving bread to the hungry, blessing a stranger, tending a plant. The purpose was not charity but circulation. Healing that is kept becomes stagnant. Healing that is shared becomes infinite. The act of service sealed the transformation, ensuring that the light received would continue to flow. Let the blessing not end with you, they would say, but through you. As time passed, those who lived in this way no longer feared the return of illness or sorrow. They had learned to see both as part of the sacred rhythm. The heart expands and contracts like the tides, one rabbi wrote. When it contracts, remember that it prepares to expand again. Reflection is the wisdom of cycles, the knowing that nothing is permanent, yet everything is purposeful. When dusk settled over the villages, the healers would light a small lamp and sit before it in silence. They would gaze at the flame until its image imprinted behind their eyelids. Then, closing their eyes, they would breathe softly and imagine that flame resting in their heart. "This is the light that never dies," they whispered. "Carry it into the world." It was their final lesson, that true healing does not end with the healer or the healed. It spreads quietly. Like fire passed from one candle to another, never diminishing, only multiplying. In modern times, we search endlessly for cures, in pills, in technologies, in distant philosophies, forgetting that the oldest medicine still waits inside us. The Hebrews knew that the body listens to the soul, and the soul listens to the divine. When these three voices sing together, no illness can remain. Reflection invites this harmony to become daily life. It teaches us to live not as seekers, but as keepers of remembrance. To reflect is to see the pattern behind all things, that love is the architect and faith the foundation. It is to understand that even in moments of silence or sorrow, the divine speaks, sometimes in whispers too soft for the mind, but always audible to the heart. The last prayer of the Hebrew healer was simple. As they lay down at night, they would say, "Into your hands I entrust my spirit, for you have redeemed me, O Lord of truth." In those words was the entire journey, curiosity transformed into trust, revelation into understanding, transformation into surrender, awakening into peace. It was not only a prayer for rest, but a declaration of belonging. The healed soul no longer sought refuge. It had become refuge itself. And so the final image is this: a bowl of water beneath the starlight, perfectly still. Above it, the reflection of the heavens. The stars shimmer, but the water does not move. It holds their image quietly, as if remembering. The same water that once carried words, absorbed fear, and reflected flame now rests in peace. It has fulfilled its purpose, so too has the soul. The healer extinguishes the lamp and feels the night embrace them. There is no triumph, no sorrow, only stillness. The same stillness that hovered over the waters in the beginning, the same stillness that will greet the soul at the end. The voice within speaks once more, not as command, but as reminder. Be as the water, pure and reflecting. Be as the light, constant and free. Be as the salt, humble and preserving. And know, you were never separate, never lost, never unhealed. The stars above seem to pulse brighter, as if acknowledging the truth. The air is warm now, the silence complete. Somewhere deep within, the soul smiles, not because it has arrived, but because it finally understands that it never left. The journey of the remedy, from curiosity to revelation, from transformation to awakening, from awakening to reflection, ends where it began, in the sacred simplicity of being. The water remembers, the light remains, and the soul, forever, is healed.